So yes, who am I? I'm working for the French government, ANSSI, which is the French cyber defense agency. I'm contributing since a long time now to SuriCata. I'm very happy to do that. I'm mostly the one to blame for the Rust code, so sorry if you're not loving the language at all. But I have to say I'm not the only one to blame, because these guys, they were not especially supposed to accept the idea without discussing it too much. So, yeah. No, seriously, a big thanks to you guys and to the OISF also for being such great people. So the agenda, well, maybe a bit of a surprise, but I decided this year not to talk about Rust, or I try to, and talk about TLS 1.3. So we'll see, well, what's coming with TLS 1.3, which is already there, what's new, and especially the impacts on detection, because this is a huge change on what sensors like SuriCata can see or cannot. So, well, TLS, I suppose all of you have heard about that. Its objective is to be able to establish secure communication. So what does mean secure communication? It means that you have confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. And believe me, if you do not have the three, then there's no point using TLS. Because, for example, if you have confidentiality, but you are talking to the wrong person, there's no point in using a secure channel, right? So people should be really aware of using not only, you know, seeing the green lock on the browsers. Establishing TLS is much more than that. You have to check, for example, that the trust you can have to the peer you are talking to is really good. So a bit of history. I won't read everything on it. So you'll have the links on the slides later, but TLS is quite long history. It is said to have been first implemented by an intern. I don't know if it's true, but anyway. SSL v2 and v3 were quickly released, and as you can see, even though TLS 1.0 was released, the fact is SSL v2 and v3 were not prohibited since recently, which is representative of how things are sometimes evolving very slowly. People were not interested in removing older versions. I believe that what has changed things is mostly, well, that was caused by two things. The first was the many leaks that were published, Snowden leaks, WikiLeaks, and so on. That was about 2013, and then Let's Encrypt. These guys really helped a lot to encrypt most of now the internet because they made certificates widely available for everyone. So before that, TLS was just an add-on, and some of you may remember that, for example, in some browsers, the browser was even warning you that you were about to use a secure session. It's a warning. Why? So TLS 1.3 was released in August as an RFC. We'll see what's new. So what are the goals of TLS 1.3 compared to the previous versions? Mostly it's big cleanup, because there were a lot of things in previous versions. You know, as usual, when you do different versions of protocol, things always tend to stack up and you never remove all older things. So at some point, there had to be some new changes. Also, one of the key goals was privacy. And that is what caused some problems, and especially that what will cause problem for us, because privacy has not exactly the same objectives as security as we generally intend. So most things are now encrypted. Performance was also an objective because, for example, now that most of the internet traffic is encrypted, today more than 50% of internet traffic is encrypted, this is causing new problems, and especially for smartphones. They tend to establish a lot of repeated sessions to the same servers, and if you don't change a bit the protocol, then it's causing slowdowns, heavy load on servers, and so on. So one objective was to reduce the handshake, which is the first part of the protocol, at the very minimum. And to be backward compatible, which may not have been the better idea they had. So why? So as you can see, they removed some stuff. On red, you can see some, because I did not put all of them, because that would have made a huge slide. You can see some attacks that were done these years on the different TLS versions, and why some of the things were removed. And what's also completely interesting is that, for example, the padding problems on cipher mods, on CBC, the Vodney attack and so on, were known since something like 20 years. They were true for SSL v2, v3, they are still true for TLS 1, and still they were badly used for TLS 1.2. So I tend to believe sometimes that humanity does not learn from its previous mistakes and tend to re-implement them in newer versions. So one goal of TLS 1.3 was to completely remove that, to prevent people from reintroducing the new problems with newer versions. So let's hope they succeed. Weaker Diffie-Hellman groups, which are used to negotiate the real session key of your encryption, was also a huge problem because, for example, you could negotiate, you could use a very strong key locally and still negotiate an ephemeral key that was a very short size. So it's bad, and they had many problems with that. So what did they change? They did not change the rest of the protocol, they changed mostly the handshake. So the handshake is the first part of the protocol. It's the moment you negotiate, you just establish trust between client and server. Usually, client has to trust only the server, but sometimes you have to trust both ways. And they had to optimize the choice they've made. So I won't go into the details, but for example, if you compare the handshake for TLS 1.2 and 1.3, 1.2 had to exchange many messages before the handshake was established. First, the client says, hello, I'm a client, the server replies, hello, I'm a server, and so on and so on. And they negotiate parameters to configure the key, configure the cipher, and so on and so on. In TLS 1.2, the objective, 1.3, sorry, the objective was to reduce that to mostly one exchange. So there is one exchange, the client hello, the server hello, and then the very next packet, the client is able to send data. So using that, there is only one round-trip exchange, and then the client can directly send data, while keeping the security properties that are required for TLS. So that's a huge change because you don't see many things and many different protocols right now. Also, this was subject to evaluation, to much more evaluation than TLS 1.2 and previous versions, because, for example, people in French labs, INRIA, did some formal methods evaluation of the handshake, so they can now attest that it's much more robust than previously. So I promised not to talk about trust, so I won't talk about that slide, but I can show you something, like, for example, parsing a new server hello in TLS 1.3. That's a subliminal idea. So, for most people, TLS security is just about encryption, and encryption requires algorithms. So, this is called Cipher Suite because it's not only one algorithm, but several for key exchange, for encryption, for integrity, and so on. Previously, you had more than 300 algorithms available for TLS. Most of them were entirely crappy. You had some 40-bit encryption ciphers. You had some things that are completely deprecated. Why propose them if anyway you won't be able to use them? So they decided to shorten the list, and they did shorten it because, for example, there is now only 5 Cipher Suites, which are, so AEAD is a way of combining both, in one pass, both encryption and integrity. So they decided to propose only 5 Cipher Suites, and only one of them is mandatory, the first one. So when implemented a TLS stack, you only have to implement correctly one cipher right now, which is way better. And also, all exchanges right now use what we call PFS, perfect forward secrecy. This is a way of using ephemeral keys only, so that if one TLS key is broken during a connection, that won't make the attacker able to, for example, decrypt the later sessions you are establishing, because every single session will use a different key derived from the first one. So this was previously an option in the Cipher Suite. It's now mandatory. Yeah, so PFS now mandatory. That was a huge problem for many people, and that was a big of a controversy, because the fact that perfect forward secrecy is now mandatory caused problem for some people that wished to decrypt sessions. It may be for, compliance rules, for example. Some environments require you to inspect traffic and so on. It may be for monitoring, it may be for bad reasons, whatever. So there were long discussions in the IETF mailing lists on blogs and internet stuff and so on. So I published, for example, the UK government even tried to push a kind of war against that kind of choice. But anyway, they stand against the idea of removing PFS, and PFS is now mandatory anyway. But it's not finished. I mean, some people are still trying to remove these kind of things, and there was a proposal for, I find that completely stupid, but anyway, that's a private opinion, static defilement, which is a way of saying you have different keys, but they're always the same. Okay. Make your own mind. So how is formed the Cipher Suite? Also, previously it was quite complicated to understand because, for example, in 1.2 you have to understand that first you have a key exchange algorithm, so it's protocol, the key exchange algorithm, the authentication, the encryption, and the hash, and so on. Now, you only choose the encryption algorithm and the hash algorithm, and it's done. So it's way easier than previously to choose your Cipher Suite and to understand what it means. I'm not sure every people on Earth could understand these long lines of ciphers. Well, there are a few other changes. I won't go into all details, but one of them that's particularly interesting is downgrade protection. Because if you introduce a newer version of the protocol, you want to be able, for example, that someone that would be in the middle of a connection, in the middle, cannot downgrade the protection just saying, okay, I don't support TLS 1.3, so let's go using something older, and I can control the algorithm you choose. So to prevent that, that's a quote from the RFC, they introduced something that is, if there is a downgrade in the protocol, so something says, the client says, okay, I want TLS 1.3, the server has to downgrade for some reason, then the server has to put some magic bytes that you can see in a field that is supposed to contain random bytes, so agreed, it's not random anymore, but at least the client has now a way to detect that there was a downgrade in protocol on the way to a server. So now the client may choose either to stop negotiating because there was a downgrade, or to continue negotiating, but at least it's aware that there was a downgrade. So it's a cool feature. So another problematic feature they introduced is the way session handling is done and the resumption of sessions. So as I said, for example, on a smartphone, you establish a lot of very small, for example, on a web page, you have images and so on. So you may load images, JavaScript, and establish a handshake for every single thing you are loading. That costs a lot of time, of course, and resources. So to do that, previously you had to exchange 4 messages before well, you got your session resumed. Now they introduced something which is called ZeroRTT, meaning, okay, you keep one information secret, which is a private a PSK. You keep that on the client and the server. You just show that on your next session, and then you can request what you want in the very first message. Meaning, this part is encrypted with the key you stored in your on your side, and you're able in the very first message to establish an encrypted session. So it looks very nice. Unfortunately, it comes with new problems. And for example, this feature called ZeroRTT has problems, cryptographic problems, which it's replayable. Meaning if you intercept the first packet, which is encrypted with the PSK, you can replay it as long as you want. It may not seem that bad, but for example, if you think about something that you are buying something on the internet, the attacker takes the message where you are paying, for example, $50. If the attacker can replay it again and again, that will cause you problems, right? So to fix that problem, the IETF group chose to say that, okay, we'll leave that to the server, and it should accept, for example, ZeroRTT only for things that will not cause problems. So if it's a GET request, it's okay. If it's a POST request, it's not. The problem I see in that is that as a client, you have to trust the server implementation. And you know, government guys, I don't trust anybody. So the problem is I won't trust the server for that. So this is really, really a huge problem right now. And they did not get any important reply for that at the moment. So they are aware of the problem, but I believe they are waiting to see if that will cause real problems or not. And a big change for things like Suricata is that most of the handshake is now encrypted. It was not previously, and especially, for example, the server certificate. Certificate, which contained the identity of the server, is now encrypted, so you cannot see where the client is connecting. That also includes many extensions. So now we can see that it will cause problems for us. I will skip a few slides because, for example, the key derivation is a bit complex. It's cryptography. We'll go straight forward to the impacts on detection. So what can we do for the certificate encryption? So now we can't see certificates. It's bad because in terms of monitoring, network monitoring is really useful. There are a lot of malwares, of rats, or of components that use TLS and that use crafted certificates or specific certificates that you could use for detection. You cannot write anymore. So that's a problem. We lose something here. For some reason, they did that for privacy, but for some reason, they chose not to encrypt the SNI, the server name indication. So still, it's possible to see where the client is connected because now the SNI, well, the support of SNI is now mandatory for server. The use is optional. But using the SNI, you can see where a client will connect. The problem with that is that at some point people realize that, okay, if we encrypt the certificate but not the name of the server, people wiretapping the connection will see the name of the server. So we have to encrypt that. So a new extension is coming, which is encrypted ANSSI, and in some month or weeks, I believe, Firefox and Chrome will support it. So no more SNI 2. So we really lose our vision on what's Exchange at that point. So I have not many things to propose, but client-server profiles could be really interested. J3 and J3S hashes are really good for that. There's also TLS fingerprint.io, which contains some lists of fingerprints you can find, which is really great. We can monitor that, and especially new profiles that appear on the network. That's really interesting. That could show that there was an upgrade. That could show that there was something wrong going on your network. As I said, ZeroRTT is a security risk. So it depends on what you choose on that side. So if you decide to enable it and not to care about it, okay, no problem. Otherwise, I would say that we could add detection rules that triggers on the detection on this extension, the early data extension, and that shows, for example, that something wrong is going on. And if we monitor not only the early data extension, but, for example, the data that was used on the ZeroRTT round trip, we could even detect replays. So that would be great. Downgrade attempts are really interesting for detection that could show a man in the middle. So monitoring the server random magic bits will be useful for TLS 1.3 in the future. Also, since they removed most of the messages from the handshake, a client trying to test, for example, the state machine implementation of the server, sending random messages, that could be interesting to detect. Because, for example, if you suppose that servers are correctly implemented, well, I'd say you're wrong, otherwise we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't have any job. Okay, so as people keep doing crap on their implementation, they will accept weird messages that you're not supposed to see in that correct order. So what I mean here is correct messages, but in the wrong order, for example. That's interesting to monitor. So small interlude, I hope you're not asleep like this meerkat. I took some time to find this one. And also backward compatibility is creating nightmares because they decided to make the client hello compatible with TLS 1.2. That's cool, but now there are some fields in the client hello message that are unused for TLS 1.3. That looks something completely harmless. But in some C2 command and control cases, this can be used, for example, to send commands and to get replies. Okay, so monitoring the values of the supposed to be unused field is really interesting because that could show some data exfiltration, some C2 commands, and so on. So we really have to check that kind of values. But to do that, to do that, we have to detect correctly the version of the TLS negotiation, right? That seems to be something easy, but I would say there is some trivia that is easy to go. The TLS version, is it stored in the record header, the client hello, or in the supported version extension? So if you want to know, the answer is all of these fields. So I don't understand why, but they decided to get at least 3 different places where you could store the number of the version you are using for this specific negotiation. So of course, this number can contradict. They can be not the same, and they are not the same. Usually, the client hello says 1.2 and the record 1.0. And the real value is in the extension if it's present. So Now, detecting the version, previously it was just looking at some point in the packet. Now you have to entirely parse it, go to some places which is not the same in each packet, detect the version and get that to the upper layer for detection. So it's much more complex, but we have to do that. I believe we will be working on that with me. At some point, you should say, okay, is it already deployed? Are we using it? In fact, you're probably using it a lot without knowing it, because, for example, in browsers, it's heavily deployed. There were different places, for example, different cases. For example, Google tried to push for it in Chrome 56, but they quickly pulled back because some middle boxes, I won't give an adjective here, just broke because of that, just because they did not support the extensions and so on that were in the client Hello. So they pulled back, and then after some discussions with the vendors, they pushed it again, and with an updated version of the standard, and now most browsers implemented it. But you have to understand that most companies, I suppose that you have the same companies as us in France. Most companies keep using something like Windows 95 and browsers from that date. That's great, that's interesting. You discover new flows every day. But hey, TLS 1.3 won't be the only protocol you'll see until a very long time. Remember, it took more than 15 years to go to TLS 1.2. I don't know for how long it will take to go to TLS 1.3 only. OpenSSL and other common libraries already implemented it, and also you can find custom implementation. So Facebook, I see you. Stop it, please. The problem of custom implementation is that you're not sure that they are correctly done. And you know, it sounds like an XKCD drawing. You have many crappy implementation of TLS, and someone somewhere says, okay, I will do a better implementation. So after that, you have many +1 crappy implementation of TLS. So please stop it. Leave the cryptography to experts in cryptography. Don't do that at home. It's dangerous. It will take even longer for network equipment, embedded IoT, and so on, because they tend to not upgrade their devices. I see you also. Sorry. And the real reason why it's not completely here right now is because of middle boxes. So people doing middle boxes tend to create something that just broke on every upgrade. That's bad because it really prevents in practice going into deployment. I don't know if, for example, interception middle boxes for lawful purpose, of course, are ready for TLS 1.3. I'm not sure for that. Also, there was a discussion about TLS 1.3 is preventing interception and so on. It's wrong. It just makes it visible. It's really different. So if you're in a company that has to comply with intercepting traffic, you can still do that. But the client will be aware that there was an interception. Maybe that's not what you want, but that's not my problem. To conclude, it's much more a 2.0 than a 1.3. And there was a long discussion in the mailing list. Should it be 2.0? Should it be 1.3? Should it be 3.0? Whatever. Well, it's 1.3 and it will stay like that. Most improvements are focused on privacy, but they are quite useful for us. We still can do many things about that. We still can write many rules. But my to-do list is now write them. So yeah, it's easy to talk. I have to do things. And remember that, yeah, 1.3 is a huge change. We don't see anymore some things, but it will take some time before that is completely deployed. I left a few interesting links, especially this one that is for protocol parsers, great stuff because it shows you, for example, packets and the different meaning of fields. All of the red stuff is clickable. You get that in the links on the slides when they will be published on the SuriCon website. So thank you for your attention, and if you have any question, I'd be happy to answer.